G'day groovers, rockers and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with the original bass player and founding member of the Troggs, Peter Staples. In 1964, Peter joined a group that contained Reg Presley on vocals, Ronnie Bond on drums and Chris Britton on guitar. They would soon pick their band name to be the Troggs. The band are perhaps best known for their 1966 hit, Wild Thing, which has become a rock and roll standard. Pete can be heard on all the band's hits, including Wild Thing, and was with the group till his departure in 1969. More recently, Peter's written two books. One on his time with the Troggs called Wild Thing, A Rocky Road, and another about the musical history of his local hometown called Andover, A Musical History. G'day Pete, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Let's start off at the beginning, Pete. You were born in 1944 in Andover, UK. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood?
Life in Andover was quite a quiet town years ago, and grew up like a normal family. Went to primary school, secondary school, and then when I left school, I got a job as an electrician. One Christmas, my father bought me a ukulele off the market as a Christmas present, so I started messing around with that. Of course, you didn't have hardly any toys years ago, so what you had, you played with. That was mainly the toy that I had, so I started just playing that, and I learned a few chords and quite liked it. And then a boy over the road from me had this old guitar that he said I could buy off of him, so I bought this acoustic guitar off. And I used to go to Boys Brigade, and I played the guitar there and sang with a couple of the lads. And one day, in a hall just near the hall with the Boys Brigade, I heard this loud sound coming. I thought, I wonder what that is, music. So I went and had a look, and I saw these young lads. They had electric guitars and drums, and that really blew my mind, that did, from going to an acoustic guitar, hearing ththese electric guitars, and I didn't think any more about it. Then 6 months later, one of those lads playing in that band came up to me and said, Pete, do you want to join my band? He said, I'm starting my own band up. So I said, well, yeah. So I had to buy an amplifier, quite a lot of money when I just started work. Then I bought a solid guitar, and that group was called the Senators. Mm-hmm. And we did pretty well in Andover, got better and better equipment. Then that group packed up, and I was really stuck, because I really loved my music, and I didn't have a band. One day, Chris Britton came up to me and said, our bass player's leaving our group, would you like to play bass? I said, I don't know how to play bass. He said, he'll show you what to do. So I ended up went over from rhythm guitar over to bass guitar, and that group was called the 10 Feet 5. And in Andover at the time was another group called the Troggs, and they had similar problems. They had a few members leave their group, and some left our group, and just left Chris and myself and Reg and Ronnie Bond, or Bullis, without any other members. So we just joined forces to form the new Troggs.
Of course, Strats are everywhere, but of course back then, that would have been a pretty special moment because they were kind of just coming in, is that right?
That was the ultimate guitar in those days. The group of Senators I was in, we had basic, I think they were mainly English guitars, solid guitars. To have an American guitar was something like the Strat. What happened was, with the Senators, our lead guitarist bought a Strat once, and we thought, unbelievable, how marvellous. Then he said he's leaving the group, so he left the group, and that was the only time I saw a Strat, was at that particular time. But to have a Strat, years ago, that was the ultimate, You couldn't afford it. They were far too expensive. But as you said, nowadays, they're to a penny, aren't they, Strats?
What kind of music were you playing in the Senators at the time?
Oh, it was Cliff Richard stuff, some Buddy Holly stuff we started to do as well. So the songs around that period that were in the charts all the time at that particular time. Because
you guys recorded a single in 10 Feet 5, Baby's Back in Town. Do you remember much about recording that? Because that would have been your first time in a studio. Yeah,
I remember we went up to London to record that in a studio. I think the studio was called Rhyme Muse, and I went up there, and you didn't actually have to like a song to record it. You in actual fact, there wasn't a lot of songwriters about years ago. People just played the music that they heard on the radio. They didn't bother to write because there was nobody there for them to record it. So there wasn't a lot of writers. So any song that you came across that somebody had written and you had the opportunity to go into a studio, you went in there, and that's what we did. And didn't particularly like the number, but the man that conducted us, I was saying produced us, he had contacts in the music industry, and he actually got the record released for us, but it didn't do anything. It wasn't a very good song at all, but to actually have a song released, a dream really in those days.
That would have been like the first kind of recording you played bass on, and I've read that like you were loaned that bass by Dave Glover, I think it was. I think he was the bass player that left and then you joined. Did you ever give back that bass after you kind of used it?
Oh yeah, well I only used it until I got round to being able to get one of my own, because they sort of dragged me in very quickly because they were a group that was already doing gigs. So when their bass player left, they had to get somebody in a bit quick. Of course, me not playing the bass at all, I had to learn what to do, and I didn't have one, so he let me borrow his. I think maybe for 2 or 3 weeks until I got one of my own. So I managed to sort of get a bass on the hire purchase, pay so much each week, and that's how it all started.
Do you remember what the first bass you ever got was?
Yeah, that was the one that I played on Wild Thing, a Burns Trisonic. It was a Burns Trisonic, and that's what I played on Wild Thing, and all the earlier hits.
And of course, you mentioned a little bit earlier how the Troggs came to be about. I was doing some reading, and it wasn't until February 1966, I think, that you guys were signed by Larry Page. So, I mean, 64, you guys kind of got together. What was that kind of first year like before, like in 1965, before you kind of got signed by Larry Page?
Well, it was quite good, really. The funny thing was that the Troggs used to do all R&B stuff, Muddy Waters, Howl and Wolf, and all that sort of stuff. And we used to do all not Rolling Stones. Well, we did the Rolling Stones, but it was me. We used to do like the stuff like the Four Seasons and stuff like that, and the Beatles stuff. The two lots of groups, the Reg and Ronnie and Chris and myself, got together, so we had to sort of play whatever music each group was happy playing. So it was an interesting period. But of course, we had this problem where Reg was the bass player and I was a bass player. We didn't have a singer. So what it worked out that as I've been playing the bass a lot longer than Reg, that I should carry on doing that. And Reg could sing a few songs as well and play the tambourine. So, but as time went on, Reg used to, because he couldn't just stand up there and play the tambourine all night and let the rest of us sing. So he actually did take over the singing eventually.
Had Reg stayed playing the bass, would you have ever taken over the vocal duties, or Yeah,
I think I would, but because when the 10 Feet 5 broke up, it just left Chris and myself there. Well, we got in a drummer, and we went out as a group called The Feet. It was just three of us, and we went out as The Feet. So, and Chris and I used to do all the singing. We share the singing between us, so we could both sing a little bit, but it was just how things. But what happened was that Reg, after I said there not many people writing songs then, in this particular period, people did start to write a few more songs, and Reg said, I've got a couple of songs that I've written. Perhaps we could play those. So, he actually did the singing and also did the songwriting for the earlier numbers.
What were some of those early Troggs songs that you were playing live, like before you kind of recorded them?
Well, I'd say we did stick to a lot of R&B numbers because we hadn't been formed very long, and we didn't have a lot of numbers. I think we had about 12 numbers altogether, and we were going out doing gigs that they wanted us to play 2 3/4-hour spots. Well, we could manage to do 1 3/4 for the first half, and then we'd have to do the same songs for the second half. So we used to do a lot of 12-bar blues numbers because you could do that for about 10 minutes. that would kill a hell of a lot of time playing one sort of R&B number or blues number. So we did quite a few of those. In actual fact, some of the songs that Chris and I used to do before joining Reg and Ronnie, we could actually carry on. I could sing my numbers and Chris could sing his numbers. And actually Ronnie did some singing as well. So all four of us used to help out singing numbers. But I think altogether we only had about 12 numbers when we started off together.
Of course, after that year of without being signed, 1966, pretty much straight off the bat, you guys are signed by Larry Page and in the studio not too long after he signs you. And the first single that came out for you guys was Lost Girl. Do you remember much about that first session as the Troggs?
Well, as I said, Reg was doing the songwriting, so we recorded that one. Don't remember a terrible lot about the earlier numbers that we recorded, but when if you got a record release, that was the main thing in those days, because if you could put on your advert you were a recording artist, then you could get a lot more money. Even if the record didn't make it, you made a little bit more money doing your gigs, about £15 a night. But I think when we said we were recording artists, we could go up to a bit more, about £25, £30. Mm-hmm. I can't remember actually recording Lost Girl. That memory didn't stay with me.
This is probably more of a Chris question, but I thought I'd ask you anyway. I was listening to Lost Girl, and there's a bit of distortion on the sound of the guitar, and I'm just thinking, how did you guys get that sound back then? I know you weren't playing the guitar on that track particularly, but how'd you get that sound?
I really think, and you say the distortion bit, I think because we were only a three-piece and the amplification wasn't so good as what it is today, you have to turn your amps up really loud. I think Chris had his amp on full bass and full treble. That's how he used to set his amp up. And of course, sometimes it was so loud that you get that sort of bit of distortion with it as well.
I think Lost Girl came out very quickly too. I mean, February 11th, 1966 is the date that I've been able to come up with. It doesn't seem like it took very long then to you guys to get that record out. I mean, how long, roughly back then did it take to get a 45 from recording to pressed, ready to go in the shops? Well, the thing was that you record the song, then you got to get somebody a record company to take it on. So there was no, of course, we hadn't had the hit then, so we didn't sign a contract. You say about when we met Larry Page, and we hadn't even signed a contract with him when Wild Thing was in the charts. We were unsigned then. Okay. It's only after he realised that he hadn't signed us that he got the contracts out a bit quick. So we weren't signed up, when Wild Thing was released. In saying that, you mentioned Wild Thing there. When did you hear that song for the first time? I assume they would have shown you the Chip Taylor demo, or when did you hear it for the first time? Well, when he, I don't know the actual dates because it's so long ago, but of course Larry Page went across to America. He just started his record company up. He went across to America to find maybe acts or songs or anything, because that's where the main market was in America. So, and then he came back and he had a couple of songs that he said he's got this Lovin' Spoonful number that was a hit in America. If we recorded it a bit quick and got it out in England before the Lovin' Spoonful was released over there, he said, could have a hit. He said, I also got this other number that I've picked up over there. This guy, Chip Taylor, wrote this song. He said, you can have a go at doing that one. So we said, go away and rehearse these two numbers. He had an orchestra, and he said, when I record my orchestra, if I've got any time left at the end of my recording session, you can do these two numbers for me and see what you get. So we said, all right. So we took the two numbers, the 11 Spoonful number. Did You Ever Have to Change Your Mind? I think it was called something like that. This other song called Wild Thing, which was some fellow just strumming a guitar and singing, Wild Thing, you make my heart. It was a very, very drawn out country sort of song. Nothing of any substance there. But anyhow, when we started to rehearse these songs, Reg couldn't do the Loving Spoonful number. He said, I can't do that. He said, I can't sing those sort of songs. So we said, all right, we'll have a go at this Wild Thing. But that was a slow number and a bit drab. So
we had to do it, we had to, as I say, Chris used to wind his amplifier up, full treble, full bass. All Ronnie wanted to do was hit hell out of his drums. I think he was quite happy doing that. So we got going on this wild thing, and we really laid into it. I think it's mainly, to start off, it was a bit of a laugh when we were doing it, because it was so different to the record that we had. But anyhow, and Reg did his sexy voice, but of course, Chip Taylor's voice wasn't the sexy voice that Reg put it. So we were playing around, really, messing around with it. Anyhow, we got that one in the count. So, right, that'll have to do that one. Reg said, I can't do this 11 Spoonful number. He said, but I have got another number that I've written that we might be able to do. It's called But a Girl Like You. So we said, right, he only had a tune in the words, so we did it in our own heavy way. That's what we ended up doing. Yeah. So Larry Page contacted us once, and he said, a month later, and he said, I got this recording session by my band. Come up on such and such a day, such and such a time. If there's any time left, just bash these numbers out that I gave you. So we drove up to London. We sat outside the studio in our van, and then this fellow came out and he said, right, lads, get your gear in the studio and let's hear these two songs. So we jumped out the van, ran in, set our gear up. Larry Page, couldn't see him. He was up in the control room. We just heard this voice saying, right, lads, get your gear plugged in. Let's see what you can do. So we just plugged it in. Reg started singing. We started playing 3/4 of an hour, and all those two songs were done, finished. Yeah. He said, that's fine, lads. He said, you go now, and I'll be in touch. And I thought, oh, well. So anyhow, we got in our van and went back to Andover, and thought, it was a pretty old setup that was. But we didn't, of course, realise all what we did that day.
You were rehearsing Wild Thing, and I've been listening to the recording, because, the solo there is quite unique to, it's quite a unique solo, because it's played on a octarina, I think it's called. And, whose idea was that to play it on that instead of, just a guitar kind of solo?
Well, Larry Page, with the original demo, the recording engineer, he didn't play an ocarina. He sort of had his hands cupped together. He's blowing through it, making that sort of noise through his cupped hands. Larry said to us, on the demo, well, I can't do that. He said, I wonder if I could get Chris to do a guitar solo there. So he said to his producer, his director, musical director, he said, an ocarina or something. He said, I don't know, but he said, pop down the road, he said, and see if you can get an ocarina. So Colin, as the musical director, he went down the road and went to this music shop, and he said, can I have an ocarina, please? And the fellow said, what key do you want it in? He said, I said, no, they came in different keys. So he said, oh, yes. So he said, give me one of those. So he brought the ocarina back, and he's very clever, Colin, the musical director. And all he wanted to do was find 3 notes that he could do this solo, because Wild Thing's only 3 chords anyhow, A, D, and E. So if he could find the notes that he could play around those 3 chords, then he was all right. So he actually taped up most of the holes in the ocarina and just left 3 there, and he played the ocarina, with just 3 holes there. So and that's what the ocarina. Otherwise, if he couldn't have done it, there'd have been a guitar solo in there rather than the ocarina. But I think the ocarina sort of stated its stamp on Wild Thing, which is people actually know Wild Thing with the ocarina now, which is a part of the song.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think it definitely adds to its uniqueness, definitely. And when you guys recorded that, I'm just thinking about, was it 1-track mono tape back then? Did you play it live in the studio with no overdubs?
Oh, well, there was no, definitely no overdub. I think it was 8-track. We had 8-track recording in those days, and it actually was a tape, Ampeg tape. Quite a wide tape, and you get 8 tracks on there. So no, there was no overdubbing or nothing. The only thing was that the ocarina was put on, I think, later on properly, because I think Conrad does several attempts at it, but I'm not too sure about that, because when we left the studio, we left that, because those things have got to be, when you record them, they got to be mastered, so What they do to it after, I don't know. But I think if we just did it maybe 1 or 2 takes each song. Well, it only took 3/4 of an hour, and they were both finished then.
I mean, that song was number 1 in the US, number 1 in Australia, I think number 2 in the UK. I mean, do you remember, I bet you were pretty excited and like when you were told that it was gone to number 1 in the US, like do you remember that feeling or that time when you were told that?
Oh yes. Because Wild Thing was released in America with A Girl Like You was on the B-side. And that was a mistake because we wanted With A Girl Like You to be the follow-up to Wild Thing in America. But I think they just used what they had available that we recorded and just stuck it on there. But fortunately, With A Girl Like You was released as a single in England after Wild Thing, and Wild Thing didn't reach number 1 in England, but With A Girl Like You did, at exactly the same time as Wild Thing was in number 1 in America. So we're number 1 in America and number 1 in England with two different songs. One was the A-side and B-side in America.
You mentioned With A Girl Like You there, and we were talking about the uniqueness of Wild Thing, but I think something that's really unique to With A Girl Like You is when Reg goes ba 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 ba, because I mean that was originally meant to be trumpets. And do you think that adds to the uniqueness, like that the fact that you guys didn't use trumpets, but that you used just Reg going ba 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 ba, yeah?
Well, we had to initially, as I said, it was just the 3 instruments there, and so we didn't have any keyboards or any other effects. So we just had to use what we had, and if you had to put something in there, we did have to sort of singing, ba 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 ba. So we were a very basic group. We really were to start off with, and we had to use. And I think maybe that was a part of our success. It was so basic that people could understand it. With A Girl Like You, it was a melodic song. And it's funny you should say the ba 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 ba. When I tell people about, With A Girl Like, they said, oh yeah, ba 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 ba. So it's true what you say. They do remember the ba ba bars.
Yeah. As soon as I read that you guys were meant to use trumpet, or like there was the idea to use trumpets, I was thinking, yeah, that could work. And then I thought, well, no, hang on a second. I mean, that part of the song is those ba 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 bars. I mean, do you think it would have been as big a hit had you used trumpets, or like, I mean, as you said, it's a pretty important part of the song.
I don't think so. I don't think it would, because it would have. I really can't answer that one because I don't know, because all I've ever known is that, and I think. This is what I tell most people, especially with Wild Thing. When other people, like semi-pro groups, and even some of the pro groups try to do Wild Thing, they cannot do it. They make it like into a cha-cha. They don't sort of do it very, very basic. But they all do it completely different. But it's quite ironical that you get some of the really big acts like Bruce Springsteen. He does it on stage. Hendrix, he used to do it on stage as well. So, but everybody used to do it different. And Wild Thing is very hard to do because of the timing of it. People don't know where to come in or where to stop or where I think they do know where it is, but they want to do it their own way. It's a very hard song to do, even though it's so basic. People don't like it. They find it too basic. They try to put other things in there, and it completely kills it.
I was listening very closely to your bass lines on With A Girl Like You, because I think With A Girl Like You, I mean, your bass lines are I think they're very important to the song, like especially with headphones. I was listening to that, and yeah, I mean, would you say that like your bass lines on that song are like pretty important to the recording?
Well, the thing is, as I said, Reg wrote that song, and Reg, he was a bass player before he took over the singing, and he used to write his songs playing the bass. So he'd play the melody on the bass and sing what he's playing. So that's, if you see With A Girl Like You, my bass is actually following the tune rather than playing something else. So that's how Reg sang it, and he played the bass. So I'll just copy what he was singing and playing, and so you'll find that my bass is actually playing exactly what Reg is singing. You
mentioned a bit about Chris's guitar and how he got that kind of sound, and I'm thinking for your bass sound, like, did you do pretty much the same kind of thing? Did you turn up the knobs pretty much the whole way and like bash away at it? Like, how'd you go about it?
Well, I had that Burns bass for years, it wasn't the most expensive thing. It's a little bit like Paul McCartney and his Hofner bass. It's not really the best sound, but it is the Beatles sound, that Hofner bass that he plays. And I think it's the same with the Troggs. I could have bought a much more expensive Fender or something like that, and I would have lost, or we would have lost, that bass sound. So you say it's unique. Mainly it's because I play with a plectrum. A lot of blokes play with their fingers. Can't play with my fingers. The Burns was a quite cheap bass, so I had to get some sort of sound out of it. Sometimes it doesn't sound like a proper bass. That's the sound of the Troggs, early Troggs.
Yeah, and you mentioned Reg's writing process, a bit about Reg's writing process there, and how he kind of wrote the songs originally on using his bass. And did you get much say on like what you would play for your bass lines, like, or did Reg write them, or like, yeah, how did all that kind of come to be?
We used to work together, and it was quite. Chris was very good at sort of making suggestions because he's a classically trained guitarist, so he's quite technical, really. So it didn't matter too much what I played because he could put all lovely fancy pieces in, which make some of our songs that is very crude sound, quite technical or pretty in certain times, in certain cases. So we all used to get together and Reg say, "Oh, I don't like that. That doesn't fit there, Pete. Can you do something else?" I said to Chris, I said, "What else can I put in there then, Chris?" And Chris said, "Well, try this." So I tried it. And Reg said, "Yeah, that's it." So then I would just take up maybe what Chris has showed me or what Reg has shown me. So, but sometimes I just do it on my own. So it was a matter of everybody having their say and hopefully agreeing the end result.
Sounds like it was quite a collaborative effort. I mean, like it sounds like recording then would have been a pretty positive kind of environment then for you guys.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It would say so sometimes that if you can get the opportunity to rehearse these songs prior to going into the studio, which earlier on we did. But of course, when we got very, very busy and we were on the road all the time, we didn't get a lot of time to sort of, rehearse any new songs because we were doing gigs all night long, traveling the next day. Then they would call us into the studio they said, we need some songs. So some of the songs we rehearsed in the studio, and of course you're paying time for that all the time. So they're geeing you up. So some of the stuff was very rushed. They just wanted to get as many songs or recordings out of us as possible to get them released, to get the money coming in. So it would have been nice if we'd had a lot more time at home rehearsing the numbers.
Did you find that the places and the audiences you were playing were like getting bigger, like that you were playing to more people and bigger, just bigger places? Yeah.
Oh, yes. We did some really big gigs. Because some of the stadiums you played at, you played with other major acts as well. When we used to do tours, like 2 months touring. We did one with Gene Pitney, the Gene Pitney tour, and then we did another big tour with the Walker Brothers. It was, so you didn't have a lot of time for writing songs because you were traveling in the day, playing at night, and then up again next morning, back on the coast. So you didn't get a lot of time for practicing. But the gigs in the early days, a lot of them were theatres and places like that. And then, of course, you did the big stages like we did Wembley, but that was with loads and loads of other groups. Big stadiums in Germany. So, yeah, we did thousands and thousands of people, yeah.
On the second album the Troggs did, I think it was called Troggolo Dynamite or something like that. I think it was February 1967 it came out. And there's actually an original song by you on that album, and it's called Oh No, I think it's track 4. Like, how did that kind of come to be? Like, do you remember writing that song, Oh No?
Yes. On the odd occasion, I used to write a song, and of course, with a lot of the songs we all write, you get the basic things down, and then people add things to it. So, but funnily enough, somebody did a review. Somebody that used to follow us, he worked for a newspaper, and he came to that recording session. He said the best thing that came out of that recording session was Pete Staples' song, Oh No. So I was quite pleased about that, not being noted by songwriting. But an Italian bloke did a version of that. Johnny Solo, he did a recording of that as well. So I was quite pleased with that.
Yeah, and it must have been like great for you also to have something of yours like that you had written on your band's like album. Like that must have been pretty great for you.
Yes. It was good, but at that particular time, everything was so busy and rushed that you didn't get time to think about. There's so many things, you were having you had to go to get a radio interview or to get your photographs done, photograph session. So you didn't have time, or maybe later on in the evening you'd have a gig to do. So you didn't get a lot of time to think about the effects or the consequences of anything, really.
By this point, 1967, the group had obviously shown itself to be fantastic writers of music. Like, do you remember when he presented "Lovers All Around" for the first time?
Well, it's quite strange with "Lovers All Around" because we just had a big court case with Larry Page, and we left him. We thought, well, where are we going to go from here? But Reg said, well, I got this song. He said, we've got to keep working. So he said, I got this song. So we sat down and we played this song. We lost the management of Larry Page, but we didn't lose the recording contract with Dick James. So we were contracted to do more songs. We said, well, we got a couple of songs. So we did this Lovers All Around in the studio, and it sounded pretty good, and we were very happy with it. And we went back to Andover to our new manager, Stan Phillips, and we said, what do you think of this then, Stan? And he put on his record player, and he sat back in his chair, and he closed his eyes. I thought, what's he thinking of? And he said that is amazing. He said, that's a hit. That's the number one. And it was. So that was released, and that that went to number one or number two, something like that. And, that's just after we finished with Larry Page. So we were a little bit down in the dumps because Larry used to look after everything for us.
Yeah.
But going out and doing that on our own, we thought, we're not that bad, really. If we can go out and something like that.
Of course, Larry wasn't with you guys anymore. I mean, would that have been the first single by you guys to not have been produced by him as well?
That's right. That was produced by Colin Frexter, the ocarina player.
Oh, okay. Yeah, was he different was it a different experience in the studio having him as a producer to say when you guys had Larry as a producer?
Well, yes and no. Colin he was a musical producer. Larry used to say what he wanted, but he couldn't actually show us what to do. But Colin could say, well, I think you need to put this in here, lads. And he could jump on the piano and he could put it in there. Larry used to be up in the control room with the engineer. Of course, if you got a good engineer, you got a good musical director, and you got a good song, you're there. You actually don't need anybody else. If you got a good engineer, a good engineer is so important as well. And if you got a good musical director and you got a good song, you're virtually there.
Yeah, listening to the earlier songs you guys did and then listening to that one, it sounds like with Lovers All Around that there was more production on that recording. Like you had an orchestra. I mean, was that Colin's idea, or how did it all come to be?
Yeah, as I said earlier on, we played with the equipment which we had, and we had to do whatever we could with the equipment, and that. As time moved on, they started bringing synthesizers and things like that. As I said, Chris was classically trained, so he could go from the heavy rock stuff over to things like Lovers All Around with that 12-string guitar, that lovely riff going through on the 12-string. So, yeah, we did, actually move on to other stuff. And Colin being there was a great help, because he could do a lot of the things that, we couldn't do because he was so clever on the keyboard.
I think it was almost 30 years later, I think maybe 29 years later, that Wet Wet Wet's version of that song came out. What do you reckon of that version?
Oh, yeah, it's a great version. Oh, yeah, it's a great version. I'm always a believer that the original version is always the one that is best. Not because we did it, because I actually prefer simpler sort of stuff. You can keep putting the extra stuff on and the extra stuff on. But we couldn't have done their version, because they had so much more into it than we couldn't have done that on. This is the problem if it's just bass guitar and drums, and you go on stage and you record a song that's got an orchestra in and loads of it. It doesn't sound the same when you play it live to people if you haven't got a synthesizer or anything like that. I just wonder, just talking about that if Wet, 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 if Reg hadn't written that song, somebody else had written it, gave it to Wet, 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 how they would have done it.
Yeah.
I don't quite know, because we played it as Reg sang it to us. But if somebody else, not Reg, had written those words and that tune and gave it to Wet, 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 how would that have turned out? Would that have been such a phenomenal hit? It might not even been a hit. You don't know how different people do these things.
How did you kind of come to leave the Troggs? Like, what? Like, if you're comfortable with sharing, like, with that, like, how did that all kind of come to be? Yeah.
Well, when we weren't getting the success anymore, the records weren't selling. Of course, we had trouble with the management and all this business. We didn't know where our money was going either. So, we didn't have much money. We weren't getting the hit. And then the old cracks started forming. People started blaming different things, different people. It's the old syndrome, if there's something's going wrong, you blame this one. It could have been going marvellous all years, and all of a sudden if things start going wrong, you're the problem, or a situation has been the problem. The problem wasn't there before, so I don't know how suddenly, But anyhow, when I got married and I went away on my honeymoon. When I came back, we did, I think, a gig over in Sweden, something like that, and we came back home. I just got married, and Reg rang up and said, Larry wants to meet us in London. So we went up there, and all of us together, and went in this room, and Larry said, the lads don't want you in the group anymore, Pete. So I was completely gobsmacked about that. Yeah. So I didn't actually find a sensible reason. Oh, Ronnie said, you like different music to us, Pete. I thought, oh, God, they didn't give me any sensible reason. So that was it. From that day on, that was the end of it for me. So off I went.
I think it's important that we highlight some of your more recent music work, because I think you've been working with Karen Enna as well. Like, you did some songs of her. I mean, yeah, how did all that kind of come to be?
As I'm not a singer, and I could write songs, I used to write these songs, and I used to record them at home, me singing, but I'm not a singer in any way. And I didn't have the equipment to make myself sound any better. So my wife worked with this girl who was a good singer. So she came along to my house, and I said, I've got these songs. I could do the musical bit, but I couldn't do the singing. So she did the singing, and lovely voice, and we did some really good stuff together. And but that went on for a while, and then she got mixed up with this boy, and she had a baby, and that was the end of that. So that finished. But at least I had a load of my songs done with a nice voice on.
No, and she definitely has a lovely voice. I've been listening to some of the songs, and one of them that I really, really love is, I think it's called Volcano, and I love that track. How did you, like, because you would have written that, I mean, how did that kind of come to be? Like, what was the inspiration for the song?
Well, I don't think there was no inspiration at all. It's just, funny enough, I do like that song, and when I've listened to of course, you know about the Eurovision Song Contest now, don't you?
Yeah.
Because Australia's actually in it now, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So
I wrote that song, thought that would be a good song for the Eurovision Song Contest. So I tried to send it off, but I'm glad you like that one, because I can imagine that one doing very well at the Eurovision Song Contest. So, yeah. And there was another song on there, Move a Little Closer. Now, somebody rang me up on Facebook, they were looking for songs for the 60s movie they were doing. Yeah. So I got in touch with them. I said, well, I got this number. And they said, oh, what's that one? So they put it on this movie in America. So I was quite pleased about that.
I think it's also important we also highlight, just before we go, your books. I mean, you've recently, I think you've come out with another book, and you've done an autobiography about your life with the Troggs. I mean, yeah, can you take me through like your book kind of work? I mean, I think the first one's called Wild Thing, A Rocky Road, and I think your new one's called Andover, A Musical History. Can you, take me through that?
Well, when I used to go out and have drinks with my mates, and I used to tell them stories, and we always used to sort of end up laughing and having a good joke about them. And one of my mates said, Pete, he said, you could write a book, mate, with those stories. So I didn't think any more about it, and then all of a sudden I thought, well, I don't know what got me going on it, but anyhow, I decided I would do it. I got going on that, and I finished it. Didn't think I'd find a publisher, but somebody who I knew on Facebook, they said, oh, I'm friendly with a publisher, and they jumped at the chance. And I started it in, I think, January, and I finished it, I suppose, about April or May, something like that. I finished it then, and then they said, we want it out for Christmas. So I had to get it all up. Well, I had to get it all up together for Christmas. So it's very rushed, and it took me a hell of a lot of time to do. But did that one. But the second book. Oh yes, somebody asked me to write an article about the Troggs and where they used to rehearse in Andover. A place called the Copper Kettle. It's like a tea room with a big function room at the top, and they used to practice in this function room years ago. And this Andover History and Archaeological Society said, would you write an article about the Troggs? And so I said, yeah. So I started to write it, and I thought, well, the Troggs weren't the only group, and the Copper Kettle wasn't the only place where groups played. There's loads of groups in Andover. So I decided to write a little booklet on the pop groups in Andover of the 60s. I knew most of the blokes, so I thought this would be quite an easy one to do. So I went on the internet and I asked people if they got any stories about the groups they played in the 60s. And somebody said, why just the 60s? Because these groups went on in the 70s. Same people playing in different groups in the 70s. I said, yeah, it's all right. So I included the 70s, and then I thought, some of these blokes are actually playing in the 80s in another group. So I decided I'm going to have to do the whole caboose. So I went right back to 1800 and something, right the way up until the present day, writing about brass bands, skiffle groups, jazz bands, traditional jazz bands. And then I had to include operatic societies, choral societies, folk clubs, pop groups. I had to put the whole lot in this book. Taken me about 18 months to do, but it was actually lovely interviewing these people, because some of these people played in Andover. They just played and they thought, well, that's it, I did my bit in Andover. Nobody will ever think about me again. But to get their stories and their photographs in this book about the history of Andover music, they were over the moon.
It sounds like such a fantastic project. You mentioned that it's done. Has it been published? Like, can people get it? Like, is it on Amazon? Like, where can people get the book?
It's not on Amazon, but they can actually get it on my site, petestaples.co.uk. If they go onto that, and they can buy it through PayPal or something like that. But so they go on my site, you can see the book there, and postage and all that I've included in the price.
All those projects that you've mentioned, they just sound fantastic, Pete, and I just want to thank you so much for making the time to talk with me today. It's been a great experience.
Okay, well, thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you.
That was bass player and founding member of the Troggs, Peter Staples. For Peter's books or music, you can head to his website at peterstaples.co.uk. Remember to share this episode with other music fans, and if you really enjoyed this edition, we'd love it if you let us know. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Vinyl Vibes, and to all you music lovers out there, stay groovy.